Hi, welcome back to Bexhill West. I'm James. Thank you for joining me. Now this week's video is going to be me putting together the little crane that I showed in my last video. However, that last video, which was about the mechanism for operating the turnouts at Bexhill West, that seemed to be quite popular, and there was loads of really constructive feedback in the comments section, such that I couldn't kind of let that rest, and I've done some development work on it in the week in light of some of the comments that people left, and also some of my own ideas on how the thing ought to be improved. So essentially there were three things that came through the comments that people thought weren't as good as they could be. Firstly was the size of the thing. Well, the size of it suited me, but it got me thinking, how would I make it smaller? And then that got me to thinking that the component count within it could be reduced. I could remove a link, and if I did so, that could change the whole thing. So I've addressed the size. Another thing that cropped up was the connection from the mechanism to the rails that needed to move, and I had very clear ideas about how I was going to go about doing that. And I was going to save that for a future video because it was going to be a little bit complex, and I thought it would make a neat video on its own. However, I think that led to some confusion, so I thought, well, let's simplify that. And finally, somebody suggested that the unit ought to have a micro switch fitted to it so you could control frog polarity. Well, it was my intention to use relays to control the frogs at Bexhill West, but as several people had commented that they'd perhaps be interested in purchasing such a device, I thought, well, let's see if we can't refine it and make it more suitable for, for everyone. So this video is all about those refinements. But before we get into it, there seemed to be some confusion around what a tie bar is. And I believe I used the term tie bar in the video, and I was referencing sort of the sliding mechanism on a pico point. So if you've got that in your mind, yes, I guess we could call that a tie bar, but that isn't actually prototypically accurate. A set of points or turnout in the real world would have two stretcher bars. Now, I'll put a picture on screen. This was a photograph I took at Robertsbridge Junction. It shows what I believe is the longest curved turnout on a preserved railway in the UK. And you can see here, if I zoom in quite closely, the two bars joining those moving rails, they're called stretcher bars. Now we can see that one of those is connected to a hand-operated mechanism, but I think the correct term for those is stretcher bars. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but I did do a little bit of research, and here's a little diagram with those two bars labelled as such. So to clarify up for the people who had asked, yes, I will be including stretcher bars on my turnouts that I've built for Bexhill West, and that is going to be part of the future video. And in fact, it's the intention to make those stretcher bars as accurate as possible, which leads to me having a peculiar sort of two pins sticking up to operate the thing. If that doesn't make any sense, or you haven't seen the previous video, don't worry about it. I'll get straight on now to explaining the changes I've made, and we'll pick it up again later. So then, how does this design differ from that which I showed in my last video? Well, you can see it here mounted underneath a P4 turnout, so that's 18.83mm gauge, but I think it would work just as well on 00 and an N gauge as well. Now if I zoom in and flip this around, we can have a look at it in a little bit more detail. So this time what I've done is I've reduced the component count. I've incorporated or done away with the little link between the eccentric and the operating bar, and in this case we've got an operating piece here which I'm going to call the follower, and that bears directly onto the eccentric, so that as the eccentric turns, that moves left to right. Now you might be asking, why is this big cavity here? Well, I had the thought that if your servo controller didn't have the facility to reverse the motion, and you inadvertently sort of put this in and it worked backwards, if you follow what I mean, what you could simply do is take the eccentric off and flip it around the other way, and then it would operate in reverse. So for example, in this orientation, if I move it clockwise, the follower moves to the right, and if I go anti-clockwise, it moves left. Now if the eccentric is taken off and fitted back in 180 degrees, sort of opposite. Clockwise now makes it go left, and anti-clockwise will make it move right. So I just thought it's kind of like a mechanical way of reversing the whole thing. I think most servo controllers you can reverse, but in any case, that's what that's all about. Now I've designed it with a view to bits of ballast possibly falling through the operating hole in the baseboard, and so that's why this top surface is angled, and there's a kind of like a shroud over the top of this eccentric cavity, and that's just so that should anything fall through any holes in the baseboard, it will kind of drop off the front and not bung this mechanism up. Although if something did get in there, a little bit of ballast or something, and wedge the whole thing, it wouldn't be difficult just to clean that out. With that in mind also, this is kind of sealed from the top, so nothing can get in there, and it's all enclosed inside. This is open at the bottom, but there's no space for anything, to any dust or whatever, to get caught in the top. Okay, so let's have a look here. I've included 2 tubes here, and these will take a pin which will operate my turnout. I'm going to use 2. I think that's fairly standard practice for sort of fine scale stuff, but if you were just using a pico point in 00 or N, then you'd only fit 1 of these, and hence the sort of the labelling on the front of this follower here. Now somebody put in the comments last week that the thing ought to have a switch on, a micro switch for controlling the frog polarity and stuff. Well, I was going to do something different. I wasn't going to include a switch, but as somebody suggested it, I've done just that. So this is a standard micro switch, and you can see it's operated as the thing moves backwards and forwards. Now I've only included 1 micro switch. It would be no trouble. I could add a second one over here, and you know, if that was necessary. I couldn't think of why 2 micro switches would be useful, but no doubt some clever person in the comments would be able to let me know. Okay, what other things? Well, I've reduced the size of it, so if we look at it from the top, it's not much wider than the track itself. It's quite compact, and certainly you could fit 2 side by side, no trouble at all. Oh, there's one other thing. It occurred to me that if this was fitted up, let's zoom in here and have a look, you're going to have wires off of these terminals of the micro switch, and they're potentially going to dangle down. Let's rotate this around a little bit. Sorry for moving this around. I haven't got my usual 3D mouse. I'm using a standard mouse here, and it's not quite as easy to manipulate this. Anyway, let's imagine this is set up on your model railway. The gap here is 12 millimeters, to sort of give you an idea of the scale of the whole thing. But it occurred to me that if you've got wires soldered on here, they're going to dangle down, they're going to look untidy and potentially get caught. So what I've done is I've incorporated just here a little hole in the body of this thing, and that sort of goes around a curve and comes out here. And the idea being, if I move this back again, I'm really sorry for doing this, I should have thought about this a bit more clearly. There we go, the wires could come straight off of here, tuck up through here, and then they're already brought out closer to the underside of the baseboard. Just a little way of tidying it up and maybe providing a degree of strain relief just in case these things get pulled. Anyway, that's what I think are improvements. This is now my final version, and I'll show you the actual thing now fitted on a turnout, and you can watch it work. And so here we have the basic component parts. I'm particularly pleased with the fit of the eccentric on the servo shaft. That's a really nice fit, even without a screw. It holds itself on beautifully, but of course it's straightforward enough to pop a screw in and hold that on there, just like so. Now, in the example I just showed, I was using a Pico turnout, and that was controlled with a Megapoints system. What I perhaps didn't mention was that the operating arm is just a piece of 1.2mm brass, and that's just simply a sort of a push fit into the hole on the mechanism. Now, in my example, I'm going to have two, but if this was just on a standard such as this, then there would just be one. And it's not necessary to glue that in, that pin. I've got the wrong tool for the job here, but so forgive me, but that just pulls out and it will press in and just works a treat. Now, one final thing I haven't shown you, if I turn it over, I'd mentioned this little hole for the wiring. So if I get some wires here, let's just put those all together. They push in quite simply, and there we go. So they could be soldered off onto the terminals of the switch, and then they're brought up nicely with the sort of the underside of the baseboard. And so then, that is my revised version for the mechanism at Bexhill West, and I'm really pleased with it. It works a treat, and in fact I've been printing those in mass. I'm going to need about 30 of them myself, so I thought I might as well just get on with it and make them all up front. Now, for those of you who had expressed an interest in maybe purchasing one of my gadgets, yes, please do. I'm going to list those on my online shop in the next week or so, so please check that out if you're interested. Now, I'm aware there's been a little bit of sort of sales talk from me in the last few videos, and I'm anxious that this vlog doesn't become a sales funnel and people feel cheated into signing up and subscribing for that. So I'm trying to come up with a way I could distinguish the two. I'm quite keen to develop what I've been doing in terms of producing products, but that wasn't really what this vlog was about. So I don't know whether I'll just kind of do like one video every now and again, or whether they should go into a separate channel of their own. I'm not sure. I'll figure that out. Either way, the things I'm making are the things that I'm using at Bexhill West, so one way or another they're going to find their way into the videos. Anyway, that's all to come, and we might even get around to that crane next time as well. Anyway, until then, thank you very much for your time. I'll see you next time. Cheerio.